Hello, everyone. Randy Harrington here. Uh, Unfortunately, earlier, about an hour ago, I went through this whole process with Shane on here as a guest, talking about the bait station. I could not get the meeting to download, so I'm going, and now Shane is doing something else tonight, so I'm going to have to try to go through this again and paraphrase a lot of the stuff that he mentioned about the bait station. So what I want to do is I recently put out a video yesterday or the night before yesterday when I got back from the overnight trip to the 400, and we had some incidents happen around the bait station. And I've already gotten multiple messages from people uh, asking questions about the bait station. How was the bait station set up? How do you know it's a Bigfoot getting into the bait station? Well, first of all, this is at the 400, so it's with all of the sightings and all the other activities that we've had out there, and close proximation, with the little Bigfoot, the juvenile Bigfoot out there. So with all of this going on out there and the foot tracks and all those type things, uh, I think it's pretty safe to say that it is indeed the Bigfoot clan that's out there getting into this bait station. Now, what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to re-describe all this with Shane, what Shane told me earlier. First, you got to understand that Shane took a long, long time to set up the bait station here. It started out with him going out there on this property, determining what was going on. And you've got to watch some of the videos to know all of the details about what's going on out there and how Shane has set it all up. But throughout, his tenure out there, where he discovered, all of these areas that he hiked into and started identifying, compressions and trackways and where they were moving into. Well, on this property on the 400, there was an old homestead, uh, and now it's uh, just rubble, a foundation rubble with a door stoop and a little bit of tin, uh, but it's basically just the homestead from the 1800s on this property. So Shane kind of cleared that out a little bit because he thought it was so neat, almost like an archaeology dig, but it was just an old 1800s homestead. So he kind of cleared it all away and created clearing, but he noticed that there were trackways coming in and converging and crossing this area. That's an area we circumvent around that to go up to a place called Crawler Hill, where we have had a lot of activity, and it also converges with a couple of other ridges and hollers that converge at that point and all come down to the creek. So kind of it's kind of a travel area where no matter what route they're taking, they end up in that area, coming down to the creek area, where we can't. So, needless to say, he started setting up a baiting station. And I want you to understand that there are a lot of people out there who do baiting stations, but from what I've seen in a lot of baiting stations, going out and setting baits on top of a stump or on a log is not very that's not very good work, because you can't guarantee what is taking your baits. If you're not setting up some kind of pattern where they have to actually work to get the food, it could be anything. I mean, I've had game cameras on fish hanging on a string, and you could see a little raccoon hands pulling that string up on the branch so they could get to the fish. So, raccoons will can do many, many things. They're smart little boogers. So, there's lots of animals. I knew a guy that was with us out there who thought that he could just stuff an apple on the side of a tree where a little prong was sticking out, 7 or 8 foot up. And when the apple was gone, he was like, "Oh my God, it can only be a Bigfoot that took it," which is ridiculous. So let's just get that off the table. This bait station that Shane has set up out there, I think is fantastic. It was a slow, slow, methodical process where uh, he started out by putting baits in a container and I think like leaving the lid open so they could just see that there were some baits. And there were times when he would see raccoon tracks or other impressions that would say, you know, it was a raccoon that got it. But then there were times where he would find compressions coming into the area. Now remember, this was a convergence of trails and compressions that every once in a while come across this particular area. So that was kind of a good area to start setting something up. And we're talking about a couple of 2 or 3 year process. That's how long this process started to go from just putting a bait out and finally recognizing that maybe the target species was recognizing that bait as something being left by Shane. So he had Tupperware containers that you could see through clear, and he had big rock, big couple of big rocks. So what he did was he started setting this container by the rock. Dug a little hole and an inch in the ground you could set the container into, and have the rock beside it. So he'd have different configurations where he would set this baits up, and then he'd come back, a week, sometime 2 weeks, and the baits would be gone or gotten into, and he'd find packages, and there were times, and eventually over time, he got to where he was slowly sliding the rock over where just half of the bowl, half of the container was exposed, and then a little bit further where most of only a part of the container was exposed. As long as they were still taking the baits and having to pop the lid and take the baits, and setting it back down. And eventually the rock was completely over the hole. So here's where it gets interesting. He would go back up to the baiting area, and you can see their picture of the rocks there. And these are not small rocks. I mean, I would say that the rock at the bottom is probably 45, 50 pounds. And then there's a rock on top of that that's probably a good 20 pounds. And then there's a rock on top of the other two rocks that has been busted into three pieces. So it's almost like a puzzle piece. And so Shane went through a lot of experiments where he would set the rocks in certain positions, and see if they would put it back together the way they fit and things like that. So there were times that he would come up there, and he remembers the moment that it it hit him that, okay, this is what's happening, when the containers were sometimes left open and then the stuff would be gone, so you really couldn't tell what was getting into them. But then there was one time where he came back, the wrappings to the granola bars that he would put in there was in there with the lid on, and it was back under the rock for the first time. So something packaged it back up and left the wrappers in the Tupperware container with the rock moved back over. So since then, the rock has been used to put back over the hole, and stack them back up the way they were to begin with, putting things back in exactly the way it was prior to them taking the baits. So we were out there on Sunday, and I just stayed there overnight on Sunday night, and Shane was out there, and he went up to the bait station, and I was stated there at camp, putting recorder logs and stuff together. And he came back to camp, and he was like, "You are not going to believe this." He said, uh, I disassembled the bait station, and the container was gone, and something left a marble in the hole underneath the rock. So here's the story behind that. A few weeks ago, the the plastic Tupperware container was left outside, and it looked like it had been damaged. So it wasn't put back together. It's like maybe the rock smashed it, maybe one of the rocks smashed it or something. So it was kind of busted up. You know how when a Tupperware container gets cold or maybe older and more brittle, the pressure of maybe those rocks pressing down on it may have crushed it and popped it open. Well, anyways, so whatever took the baits left the container, broken container, outside of the hole. So Shane replaced it with a stainless steel container that had a lid, because he was hoping now to move on to possibly getting fingerprints. He could polish and clean that and put it back in there and hopefully get some fingerprints. So this was actually his first trip back out there after initiating that stainless steel container. And so he's lifting up the rocks, and the container's gone. But there was a marble sitting in the hole. So when he came down and told me the marble was there and it was a green marble, what immediately popped in my head was I had done a video called Big Ed uh, about a place down in Oklahoma where some people had a long-term feeding project going on with peanut butter jars. A very interesting story. You might want to check that out. And in the comments section of that video, I didn't put it in the video about them being left a green marble, but she herself, Darla, came there and made a comment. She said, "Yeah, remember it left us a big green marble at the base of the tree where we were leaving the peanut butter." So that's what came to my mind when Shane opened up his hand and showed me a green marble. So here's a second story about a green marble. So I was blown away, and Shane was quite excited about it too. So let's go back up to the bait station. Uh, you know, there are lots of things crows can do. Crows have been known to bring and leave trinkets and even marbles and things like that. So I've had a hard time buying into. I I'm very skeptical when it comes to the baits, especially when people leave them out in the open and any critter can get to them. So the fact that he's morphed into where they're in containers and under this heavy rock that seems to be put back in place after the baits are taking. I mean, that's put me over the top in knowing what's probably doing this. So the fact that a marble was left in there also under the rock kind of rules out the other scenarios like a raven or anything like that. So here's what the rock looks like. It's pretty big. So we're going to go into the next picture. So there's Shane and the three rocks at the top, which is one rock busted into three pieces and then placed together like a puzzle. The last two times that he's been there, the smallest of the three rocks has been setting on the ground at the front of the stack of rocks. So that's also the way it was this time. So don't know if that's going to be a continued pattern or not. But so he kind of knew that since that's the way it looked last time, that something probably has messed with the bait. So he started disassembling the rock pile. And when you get down to the last rock and you can see how big it is, it takes two hands. I've had to lift it. I couldn't lift it with one hand either when I was up there filming. I had to use both hands to lift it. So I'd say that rock is easily 50, maybe even more. It could even be 60 pounds. It's a pretty stout rock. Uh, and so you'll see that when he flips it over, there's a hole, just a dug hole in the ground, and there was no container there. So there's the rock flipped over, and there's an arrow pointing to a green marble sitting right down in the dip of that hole where the container would normally sit. But the container is gone. Shane couldn't find it anywhere. So he did his perimeter search. I mean, I'm sure we may come across it. Maybe it'll get returned. We don't know at this point. We just know at this moment it was not there and it couldn't be found. So, but there was a green marble in the hole where the container normally sits. That in itself is pretty fantastic. So there's a picture of the marble. And what's interesting is there's another video that we put out not too long ago, finally talking about holes that are being dug out there on at the 400 and other locations. We found holes in two other locations, one all the way down in Oklahoma and another one in a whole different county there in Missouri. So, it's starting to show that these holes being dug is clearly showing a pattern of behavior with probably the youngest one of the family. Uh, so let's go into not too far from the bait station. There's a fence, and Shane always goes up and looks at this fence because what he has seen, here's the fence, and it's just above the bait station, maybe 50, 60 feet, and it's always pushed down. And there's been times when there has been vines, almost looks like they were tied to pull that top one down and tie it off so that they could easily step over that fence. Now, maybe it's because they always seem to have young ones in this family group, so maybe it's for the little ones to have easier access over the fence. maybe, I don't know. But right here, you can see that there are scrapings on the ground, fresh scrapings where it looks like something has been kind of digging around on the ground. So that's where it starts to get interesting. Here's where Shane is pointing out on the back side of that fence. You can see where it drops down into a holler or draw. But his compressions that leave this bait area and come into this area often go over the fence here and go down into that draw. And he was talking about 3 weeks ago being there with his dog and tracking, one of the compressions going down there and to the right, which would have went up on another ridge and over to where it would be just above our original base camp area. So clear travel routes through there. And so that's why when Shane goes to this area, he knows specifically what to look for as far as where the travel routes are and things like that. So anyways, so at the fence, you can see that here we go. There's a hole. Now there were 3 or 4 holes. Now here's where it gets interesting because if you watch the video that we did about the holes being dug and what we think's happening there, this almost shows exactly what we've been saying. But this is the first time we had something that we could say specifically may have been going on at the exact same time, which was, let's just say, there was a, a mom Bigfoot at the bait station, spending time there, uncovering stuff, getting the baits, whatever, and then leaving the marble. So all that took time. So while that time was being displaced, what's the little one doing? It seems like it's over here digging holes. It's almost like they're supposed to find something, keep themselves busy when mom is or dad is doing something important, but they don't want them under feet. So you go over there, keep yourself occupied, and digging in the ground seems to be that activity that keeps them occupied when they're told to stay put or whatever. That seems to be the pattern. Of course, there's a lot of speculation there on our part, but we're just looking at what we're finding. So the holes start around the fence, and those are just scrapings. And then they get closer and closer to the bait station, almost like the little one is just kind of messing around with the stick. And then let's just say it takes 10 or 15 minutes for the mom to go through the process of uncovering, taking out the power bar, enjoying it and doing what she does, put the marble in there, and then assembling it back together. So the little one seems to be digging multiple holes, but the holes furthest away from the fence that seem to get closer and closer to where the bait station is, as mom's wrapping up her whatever she's doing there, the biggest hole was being dug the closest to the bait station. And then the same thing we find on all the other holes, the stick was left. That means all the other holes, it didn't have to leave abruptly because you got these scrapings and you have these holes being dug. And then the last hole that it was digging, mom's like, okay, we're ready to go. Let's go. Maybe she doesn't even say anything. Maybe she just starts to leave. And the little one knows when I see mom leaving, I've got to get right on her ass because I'm disciplined. They're disciplined to do that. That's what it seems like. I'm just guessing. But the fact that the sticks are left in in almost like they're being used and then left immediately tells me that they're in mid stroke with that digging and they got to go. So they leave the stick right where it sits in the dirt. So there's the stick. And here's Shane holding up the stick, and you can see that it's got dirt caked on one end of it, moisture and dirt caked on one end of it, showing that it has been used like a digging tool. We find this multiple times. Shane finds this multiple times. Uh, and it's also been found in Oklahoma with another tracker that was with Shane. They each found a hole, and even the other tracker went ahead of Shane and found a hole. So Shane was actually very excited that day because he needed someone else to find one of these holes so that we wouldn't speculate, oh, he's got to be doing this. He's the only one finding these, so he's got to be doing this. So we've got all that on film. We can't wait to show it to you. But the tracker's name was Dave Soliday, and we're hoping that he joins us on some of this filming that we're going to be doing because he's a great guy and he's a good tracker. But he found a hole ahead of Shane because Shane was spending time being filmed by the producer people with that hole that he had found, and they also found some tracks coming up out of the creek to that location. So Shane was very excited about finding that hole, which matched the holes from the 400. And then the other tracker went on ahead and found another hole with a stick in it. So exciting stuff. So with that in mind, uh, I left a recorder there for one night, collected it the next day, and back here I listened to it and didn't get anything on it. But then again, nothing hit the bait station that night either. So there's a lot of times Shane will give it a week or 2 weeks before going back and reassessing the bait station. So the fact that these holes showed the dirt outside of the hole was still a little dry and soft, which means the holes weren't that old, maybe a day or two at the most. Uh, because there had been some heavy, I mean, I don't, there had been a little bit of not moisture like rain, but maybe a light dusting of snow. So it was moist, but kind of dry. So, and it was still very soft and fluffy, like the dirt dug out of the hole was still in a nice dry pile there next to the hole. So again, that's interesting. So that means he was just a couple of days missing what hit the bait station. But that means there was a week and a half since he had been there before that it sat there unmolested. So that's the kind of time frames we look at when we do this baiting station. You can't expect that you put a bait out and they're going to hit it that night so you can get that lucky. You know, the patterns that they use is their own. So who knows? So we're trying to. I'm having to work on my log camera. It got wet. Its third camera got wet and it didn't work. So, but I'm trying to figure out a way that I can learn to keep it dry, and I think I've got it figured out. But I've got to buy another $200 camera and get that log set up and set it up to where it's going to stay dry. But this might be the perfect scenario for that log camera. Have it setting back in the brush, facing the rocks there, and having the little trigger, the remote trigger under the rock, so that when that rock is lifted up, the camera in the log takes 6 pictures. And so even if it recognizes that little bitty component, which is no bigger than a 50-cent piece in the hole that triggers the camera, even if they lift that up and trigger the camera and then it worries them and then they vacate, the camera will already be taking 6 pictures. So I think that might be where, but like I said, I've got to get another $200 camera. It's just the cost and the prices of doing this is raking me over the coals. Uh, even the cost of batteries, all the all the logs and recorders and parabolics is raking me over the coals. So, needless to say, we're going to get there. We're going to keep applying these principles, and we're going to get this camera thing figured out. But this bait station, that might be our key. We set it up last year at the pawpaw trees, and the camera got wet. So we don't know how long it sat there after it got wet, but we didn't get any pictures on it. So that was a year wasted. Uh, Even though I experimented with the log at home and took great pictures, and the dogs triggered it with that little remote, 40 feet away from the camera, they triggered it and took nice pictures. So we were very excited about it. But the moment the camera gets wet, I mean, what can you do? So we got to figure out how I can keep that thing dry within that structure of the log that's closed up, because there's going to be cracks in the logs that will allow water to get in. So I've got to get that figured out. But once I get it figured out, we're gonna set that thing up and have it working by that bait station. I'm super super excited about it. But you guys, uh, what what Shane did is what you're going to have to do with your bait stations more than likely. Now you can be setting stuff up on logs and in the forks of trees and getting all excited thinking Bigfoot, and maybe Bigfoots are getting them. I don't know, but I just do know that other animals can easily get them if you're just setting them out in the open. But the way to set the pattern up, I see it only working the way Shane did it, where it is a slow process. I mean, we're talking a couple of years of slowly moving this until it's under the rock to where only they can use rock. I mean, it's really brilliant. Uh, so take that to heart. I mean, if you've really got the time to invest to work it that way, dig your hole, set your tub in there, have your baits in the tub, make it clear where they can see that there's bait in the tub with the lid on it. That way it rules out birds and other things being able to get those things. And eventually when you start getting the pattern where something is taking it, then you'll know for sure when you finally get to the point where it's always completely under the rock and the rock has to be lifted and moved, and there's no digging. You'll see where there's nothing dug around the rock to get it into the hole that's got the bait. When you see that the rock is either scooted over or lifted up, then you're going to start to know for sure what's getting those baits. So always, certainly, if you're going to do something like this, let us know, especially if you get results. We always are very interested in that. So I am sorry that I had to rephrase this and redo this without Shane's input. His input was very valuable, but I only have the generic version of Zoom, which is only an hour long, and it seems to be very spotty in how good it downloads because they want you to buy the professional version. Everything is more money and more money. They want you to buy the professional version, so they give you this really cheap version, and that's what I'm trying to use. And I'm not very good at it, so bear with me. Uh, it's all a learning process, but this bait station is a big deal, and I hope you guys understand. I hope we laid it out the way it should be done and could be done, but it's going to take time and effort. Uh, but but yes, uh, look forward to hearing your guys' response on this. So thank you, and I am out.